a bustling city where neon lights flickered and danced on rain-soaked streets, Sophie Thompson once lived in a world filled with color and dreams. As a talented designer, she had always believed her life would be brimming with opportunities and happiness. But everything changed on a fateful evening when a small argument with her husband, David, spiraled into an uncontrollable emotional storm. As David's angry footsteps echoed through the kitchen, Sophie felt her heart constrict. She was not only facing her husband's fury, but also the dark secrets that were slowly unraveling, secrets that could shatter everything she had built. In that moment, Sophie realized that life was not just about beautiful dreams. It was also about difficult decisions and relentless challenges. Would she have the strength to stand up for herself and her future? Or would she allow complex relationships and hidden truths to sweep everything away? Sophie's story begins here, where love, betrayal, and the journey of self-discovery will lead her to life-altering choices. Sophie sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by swatches of fabric and design magazines, her mind racing with ideas for her next interior design project. The soft hum of the evening filled the air, a comforting backdrop to her creative process. Just as she was about to sketch out a new concept, David walked in, his face clouded with worry. "Hey, Sophie, can we talk?" he said, his voice low and serious. Sophie looked up, sensing the tension in his tone. "Sure, what's on your mind?" David leaned against the counter, his hands gripping the edge as if he needed the support. "It's about Megan," he said, referring to his younger sister. "She's in trouble again. This time, it's really bad." Sophie's heart sank. She had heard about Megan's financial troubles before, her reckless spending and gambling habits, but she had hoped that David would finally see the pattern. "What happened?" she asked, bracing herself for the worst. "She's in debt, Sophie, a lot of debt. She needs money to pay off some dangerous people," David continued, urgency creeping into his voice. "I need your help. I think we should use your inheritance to help her out." Sophie felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. "You want me to give her my inheritance? That's $250,000, David. I've worked hard for that money. It's my safety net." David's expression hardened. "But she's family, Sophie. She needs this money more than you do. You can't just stand by and let her drown." Sophie shook her head, frustration bubbling to the surface. "I can't just throw away my future to fix someone else's mistakes. Megan has had chances before, and she never changes. This isn't my responsibility." David stepped closer, his jaw clenched. "You're being selfish. You have everything, and you're acting like you don't care about your own family. If you won't help her, then I will." Sophie felt her heart race, a mix of anger and hurt flooding her. "This isn't about selfishness, David. It's about boundaries. You can't keep asking me to fix things for Megan, especially when she refuses to change." The tension in the room was palpable, and Sophie could see the anger boiling in David's eyes. "You're just like everyone else in my family," he spat. "They all think about themselves first. If you won't help her, then I'll find a way to do it myself." Sophie turned away, unable to look at him any longer. "I'm sorry, but the answer is no." In that moment, everything shifted. David's hand shot out, and before she could react, he slapped her across the face. The shock of it left her reeling, her cheek stinging from the force of his blow. She stumbled back, her hand instinctively going to her face as she struggled to process what had just happened. "David, how could you?" she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. His eyes widened, and for a brief moment he looked as shocked as she felt, but then the anger returned, and he shouted, "She needs this money, Sophie. You don't understand." Sophie's heart raced, not just from the physical pain, but from the realization of who David had become. The man she had loved, the man she had trusted, was now a stranger standing before her, demanding that she sacrifice her future for his sister's reckless choices. "I can't believe you would do this," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I need time to think. David let out a harsh laugh, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes. Guilt, perhaps, or confusion. Think about what? It's your family's money. You'll never miss it, but she will. Sophie shook her head slowly, trying to hold on to her resolve. This isn't about money, David. This is about responsibility. Megan has had chances before, and you keep bailing her out. Nothing ever changes. David's face flushed with anger again, and he stepped forward, his chest heaving with frustration. You think I don't see how she's spiraling? She's my sister. I can't just stand by while she falls apart. Sophie felt a chill run through her. You have to let her face the consequences of her actions. If you keep rescuing her, she'll never learn. You're only enabling her. David's expression shifted, and for a moment, Sophie thought she might have reached him. But then his anger flared again, and he shouted, If you won't help me, then I'll do it without you. As he stormed out of the room, Sophie stood there, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never seen him like this before, and the fear of what was to come settled heavily in her stomach. Sophie stood frozen in the kitchen, the echo of David's angry words still ringing in her ears. She felt a mix of disbelief and fear wash over her. How had their conversation escalated so quickly? The man she had married, the one she had trusted, had just struck her. As the minutes passed, she tried to collect her thoughts, but the weight of the situation pressed down on her. She couldn't shake the feeling that everything was unraveling. David had always been protective, but now he was demanding that she sacrifice her hard-earned future for his sister's mistakes. Sophie took a deep breath and decided to call her best friend Rachel for support. Rachel, can you come over? I really need to talk, she said, her voice trembling. Of course I'll be there in a few minutes, Rachel replied, sensing the urgency in Sophie's tone. When Rachel arrived, Sophie poured out her heart, recounting the events of the evening. I can't believe he hit me, Rachel. I never thought he was capable of that. It's like I don't even know him anymore. Rachel listened intently, her expression a mix of concern and disbelief. Sophie, this isn't just about the money. This is about control. You deserve to be treated with respect, and you need to stand your ground. Sophie nodded, feeling a flicker of strength from Rachel's words. I just don't know what to do. I love him, but I can't keep living like this. I can't let him manipulate me into giving up my future. As they talked, Sophie's phone buzzed with a message from David. I'm coming back, we need to talk, it read. Her heart raced at the thought of facing him again. Are you going to let him back in? Rachel asked, concern etched on her face. I don't know, Sophie replied, her voice shaky. I need to set boundaries, but I'm scared of what he might do. When David returned, the tension in the room was palpable. He walked in, his expression a mix of anger and desperation. Sophie, we need to talk about this. You can't just turn your back on family. Sophie took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. David, this isn't just about family. It's about what's right and wrong. I can't keep bailing Megan out. She needs to face the consequences of her actions. David stepped closer, his voice rising. You think I don't care about you? I'm trying to protect my sister. You're being selfish. Sophie felt her heart race as she stood her ground. I'm not being selfish. I'm protecting myself. You can't keep asking me to fix things for Megan, especially when she refuses to change. David's face flushed with anger, and for a moment Sophie feared he might lash out again. You're just like everyone else in my family. They all think about themselves first. If you won't help her, then I will. David, please, Sophie pleaded, her voice trembling. This isn't the way to handle this. You need to let her face the truth. But David's anger only intensified. You don't understand. She's drowning, and you're standing there acting like you don't care. Sophie felt a chill run through her. I do care, but I can't sacrifice my future for someone who won't change. You need to see that." In a moment of rage, David shouted, "If you won't help me, then I'll do it without you." He turned and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. Sophie stood there, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt a mix of fear and determination. She couldn't let David manipulate her any longer. She needed to take control of her life. As the evening wore on, Sophie found herself pacing the living room, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had to change. She needed to protect herself and her future, no matter the cost. The next few days passed in a blur for Sophie. David had been distant since their explosive argument, and she felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. She spent her time working on design projects, but her mind was never fully focused. Instead, it drifted back to the confrontation and the unsettling realization that her marriage was in jeopardy. One evening, as she was sorting through some old paperwork, Sophie stumbled upon a stack of bank statements that David had left behind. Curiosity piqued, she began to sift through them, her heart racing as she noticed several large withdrawals made to an unfamiliar account. The transactions were dated around the same time that David had been asking her for money to help Megan. Sophie's stomach twisted as she pieced together the implications. "What is he hiding?" she whispered to herself, feeling a mix of anger and betrayal. She grabbed her phone and called Rachel, her voice shaky as she explained what she had found. "Rachel, I think David has been lying to me about his finances. There are withdrawals that don't make sense, and I'm starting to wonder if he's been using my inheritance to help Megan without telling me," she said, her voice trembling. "Have you confronted him about it?" Rachel asked, concern evident in her tone. "No, not yet. I need to gather more information first. I can't believe he would do this to me," Sophie replied, her heart racing. "Be careful, Sophie. If he's hiding something, it could be serious. You need to protect yourself," Rachel warned. Sophie nodded, feeling a surge of determination. She decided to dig deeper. Over the next few days, she meticulously gathered evidence, documenting every transaction and communication between David and Megan. She even reached out to a few mutual friends to see if they had noticed any unusual behavior from David. As she pieced together the puzzle, Sophie discovered that David had been sending money to Megan regularly, often under the guise of helping out with her bills. It became clear that he had been enabling her reckless behavior, and the realization hit Sophie hard. David was not just asking for her help, he was actively undermining their financial stability. One afternoon, Sophie received a call from a federal agent named Agent Collins. "Miss Thompson, we need to speak with you regarding your husband and his financial activities," he said, his tone serious. Sophie's heart raced. "What do you mean? What's going on?" "We have reason to believe that your husband has been involved in some questionable financial dealings related to his sister's debts. We need your cooperation to gather more information," Agent Collins explained. Sophie felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of dealings?" "Money laundering, among other things. We believe he may be using your inheritance to cover up his actions," the agent replied. Sophie's mind raced as she processed the information. "I'll do whatever it takes to help," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. After hanging up, Sophie felt a mix of fear and empowerment. She was no longer just a passive participant in her life. She was taking control. She began documenting everything she could find, from David's financial records to his communications with Megan. As the days turned into a week, Sophie felt a growing sense of clarity. She realized that she had to confront David, not just about the money, but about the trust that had been shattered between them. She couldn't allow herself to be manipulated any longer. When David finally returned home one evening, Sophie was ready. She had gathered all her evidence and was determined to confront him. As he walked through the door, she could see the wariness etched on his face, but she knew she had to stand her ground. "David, we need to talk," she said, her voice firm. He looked at her, confusion flickering in his eyes. About what? About your finances and Megan. I know what you've been doing, she replied, her heart pounding. David's expression shifted, and for a moment she thought he might deny it, but then he sighed, running a hand through his hair. Sophie, I can explain. Explain what? That you've been lying to me? That you've been sending money to Megan without my knowledge? She pressed, her voice rising. I was trying to help her. She's my sister, he shouted, frustration boiling over. And what about us, David? What about our future? Sophie countered, her heart racing. You've been using my inheritance to cover up your mistakes. This isn't just about family anymore, it's about trust. David's face fell, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes. I didn't want to burden you with this. I thought I could fix it. Fix what? Enabling her behavior? You're only making things worse, Sophie exclaimed, feeling the weight of her emotions crashing down on her. As the argument escalated, Sophie felt a surge of determination. She couldn't let David manipulate her any longer. She had to protect herself and her future, no matter the cost. The tension in the room was thick, and Sophie could feel her heart racing as she faced David. The man she had loved and trusted was now a stranger, and the reality of their situation was sinking in. She had to make a choice, and it was one that would change everything. David, I can't keep living like this, she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. You've been lying to me, and I can't trust you anymore. This isn't just about money. It's about our relationship. David's expression shifted from anger to desperation. Sophie, please. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I thought I could handle it. I thought I could help Megan without involving you. But you did involve me, David. You involved me the moment you asked for my inheritance, she replied, her voice firm. You've been using my money to cover up your mistakes, and I won't stand for it any longer. David stepped closer, his eyes pleading. I love you, Sophie. I was just trying to protect my family. Can't you see that? Sophie shook her head, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes. You're not protecting anyone. You're enabling her, and in the process, you're destroying our marriage. I can't be a part of this anymore. As the weight of her words hung in the air, Sophie felt a sense of clarity wash over her. She had spent too long trying to fix things for David and Megan, and now it was time to focus on herself. She needed to reclaim her life and her future. I've decided to cooperate with the federal investigation, she said, her voice unwavering. I can't let you drag me down with you. I need to protect my inheritance and my future. David's face paled, and for a moment he looked as if he had been struck. You can't be serious. You're going to turn me in? I'm not turning you in, David. I'm protecting myself. You've made choices that have put us in this position, and I can't be a part of it anymore, she replied, her heart heavy but resolute. David's expression shifted to one of anger. You're making a huge mistake, Sophie. You don't know what you're getting into. I know exactly what I'm getting into, she said, her voice steady. I'm choosing to take control of my life. I won't let you or Megan dictate my future any longer. As the reality of her decision settled in, Sophie felt a mix of fear and empowerment. She had taken a stand, and while she knew it wouldn't be easy, she was ready to face whatever came next. In the days that followed, Sophie worked closely with Agent Collins, providing him with the evidence she had gathered. She felt a sense of relief as she finally took action to protect herself. The more she learned about David's financial dealings, the more she realized how deep the deception ran. One evening, as she was reviewing documents with Agent Collins, he looked at her with a serious expression. Sophie, I want you to know that you're doing the right thing. It's not easy to stand up against someone you love, but you're protecting yourself and your future. Was Agent Collins right to take her home? A quick look over at reporter Bunchad's assistant to police car. Agent Collins? Sophie nodded, feeling a sense of validation. I just wish it hadn't come to this. I never wanted to turn my back on him, but I can't keep enabling this behavior." As the investigation progressed, Sophie found herself feeling stronger and more empowered. She began to focus on her design work again, channeling her energy into her passion. She started to rebuild her life, one step at a time. But as the days turned into weeks, the reality of her situation began to weigh heavily on her. She missed the man she had fallen in love with, the man who had once made her laugh and feel safe. But she also knew that the person he had become was not someone she could trust. One evening, as she was working late in her studio, she received a text from David. "Can we talk? I need to explain everything." Sophie's heart raced at the thought of facing him again. Part of her wanted to hear him out, to understand his side of the story. But another part of her knew that she had to stay strong. "I don't think that's a good idea, David," she replied, her fingers trembling as she typed. "I need space right now." "Please, Sophie, I'm sorry for everything. I just want a chance to make it right," he texted back. Sophie stared at her phone, torn between her feelings and her resolve. She had to remind herself of why she had made this decision in the first place. She couldn't let him manipulate her again. "I can't do this right now," she finally replied, her heart heavy. "I need to focus on myself." As she put her phone down, Sophie felt a sense of finality wash over her. She was choosing to prioritize her own well-being, and while it was painful, she knew it was the right choice. Weeks passed, and Sophie continued to focus on her work and her healing. The investigation into David's finances was ongoing, and she felt a mix of anxiety and relief as she navigated this new chapter of her life. She had begun to reclaim her independence, but the emotional toll of the situation weighed heavily on her. One evening, as she was preparing dinner, she heard a knock at the door. Her heart raced as she approached, unsure of who it might be. When she opened the door, she was met with the sight of David, looking worn and desperate. "Sophie," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk, please?" Sophie hesitated, her heart pounding. She had been avoiding this moment, but she knew it was inevitable. "I don't know, David. I'm not sure it's a good idea." "Just give me a chance to explain," he pleaded, his eyes searching hers. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realize how wrong I was. I want to make things right." Sophie took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. "Okay, but we need to be honest with each other. No more lies." David nodded, stepping inside as she reluctantly let him in. They sat at the kitchen table, the air thick with tension. Sophie could feel her heart racing as she prepared herself for whatever he was about to say. "I know I messed up," David began, his voice shaky. "I let my desire to help Megan cloud my judgment. I thought I could fix everything without involving you, and I was wrong. I should have been honest with you from the start." Sophie listened, her emotions swirling. "You didn't just lie to me, David. You put our entire future at risk. You used my inheritance without my consent. How can I trust you again?" "I know I don't deserve your trust right now," he admitted, his eyes filled with regret. "But I want to change. I've started seeing a therapist to work through my issues, and I'm committed to making things right. I want to be the husband you deserve." Sophie felt a flicker of hope, but she quickly reminded herself of the pain he had caused. "It's going to take more than just words, David. I need to see real change. You can't just say you're sorry and expect everything to go back to normal." "I understand," he replied, his voice earnest. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I'll be transparent about my finances, and I'll stop helping Megan if that's what you want. I just want a chance to prove to you that I can be better." Sophie felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and a glimmer of hope. "It's not just about Megan, David. It's about us. I need to know that you're committed to our marriage and that you're willing to put in the work to rebuild our trust." "I am," he said, his voice firm. "I'll do anything to make this right. I love you, Sophie, and I don't want to lose you." As they sat in silence, Sophie felt the weight of the decision before her. She had spent so long feeling powerless, but now she had the opportunity to take control of her future. "If we're going to move forward, we need to set some boundaries," she said, her voice steady. "I need to be involved in any financial decisions, and I want you to cut ties with Megan until she can prove she's taking responsibility for her actions." David nodded, his expression serious. "I agree. I'll do whatever it takes to show you that I'm committed to this." Sophie felt a sense of relief wash over her. It wouldn't be easy, but she was willing to give him a chance. If he was truly committed to change. "Okay, let's take it one step at a time. But know that I won't tolerate any more lies." "I promise," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I'll be honest with you from now on." As they talked late into the night, Sophie felt a mix of hope and caution. She knew that rebuilding trust would take time, but for the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of possibility. In the weeks that followed, Sophie and David began to navigate the rocky terrain of rebuilding their relationship. They established new boundaries, and David made a concerted effort to be transparent about his finances. He shared his bank statements and even allowed Sophie to accompany him to meetings with his therapists. Sophie appreciated his efforts, but she remained cautious. Trust was not something that could be rebuilt overnight, and she was determined to protect herself. She continued to work closely with Agent Collins, providing updates on David's financial situation and ensuring that her inheritance was secure. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Sophie broached the subject of Megan. "David, I think we need to talk about your sister again. I know you want to help her, but I'm worried that you'll fall back into old patterns." David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know. It's hard for me to just cut her off completely. She's family, and I feel responsible for her." "I understand that, but you can't keep enabling her behavior. It's not healthy for either of you," Sophie replied, her voice steady. "We need to find a way to support her without jeopardizing our own stability." "I've been thinking about that," David said, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe I can help her find a financial advisor or a counselor. I can encourage her to take responsibility for her own life instead of just giving her money." Sophie nodded, feeling a sense of relief. "That sounds like a good plan. It's important for her to learn how to manage her own finances and face the consequences of her actions." As they continued to discuss their approach, Sophie felt a renewed sense of hope. They were working together as a team, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like they were moving in the right direction. However, the road to recovery was not without its challenges. David had moments of weakness, and there were times when he struggled to maintain his resolve. One evening, he received a call from Megan, and Sophie could see the conflict in his eyes as he listened to her pleas for help. "David, you can't just give in to her," Sophie said, her voice firm. "You need to stick to the plan we discussed." "I know, but she sounds so desperate," he replied, his voice filled with frustration. "I want to help her, but I don't want to go back to where we were." Sophie took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "It's okay to feel conflicted, but remember why we're doing this. You need to prioritize our relationship and your own well-being. Helping her doesn't mean giving her money." David nodded, but Sophie could see the struggle in his eyes. "I just wish it didn't have to be this hard." "I know it's difficult, but we're in this together," she reassured him. "We can find a way to support her without compromising our own stability." As the weeks turned into months, Sophie and David continued to work on their relationship. They attended couples therapy together, where they learned to communicate more effectively and address the underlying issues that had contributed to their conflict. Sophie found herself growing stronger and more confident as she navigated this new chapter of her life. She focused on her design work, pouring her energy into her projects and finding joy in her creativity. One day, while working on a new design, she received a message from Agent Collins. Sophie, I wanted to update you on the investigation. We've gathered enough evidence to move forward and will be reaching out to David soon. Sophie's heart raced at the thought of the impending confrontation. Thank you for letting me know, she replied, her mind racing with possibilities. She knew that this would be a pivotal moment for both her and David. That evening, she sat down with David to discuss the news. Agent Collins reached out to me today. They're ready to move forward with the investigation, she said, her voice steady. David's expression shifted, and she could see the tension in his shoulders. What does that mean for us? It means that we need to be prepared for whatever comes next, Sophie replied. I want you to be honest with me about everything. No more secrets. Right. I promise, he said, his voice filled with sincerity. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. As they faced the uncertainty together, Sophie felt a sense of determination. She was ready to confront the challenges ahead, and she knew that no matter what happened, she would emerge stronger. The day of the investigation arrived, and Sophie felt a mix of anxiety and resolve as she prepared to face the consequences of David's actions. She and David had spent the previous night discussing their strategy, and she could see the determination in his eyes. They were in this together, and she was ready to support him, but she also knew that the truth had to come out. As they arrived at the federal office, Sophie's heart raced. She took a deep breath, reminding herself of how far they had come. David held her hand tightly, and she could feel the warmth of his grip, a reminder that they were united in this moment. Agent Collins greeted them with a serious expression. Thank you both for coming. We appreciate your cooperation, Sophie. David, we need to discuss your financial activities and your relationship with your sister. David nodded, his expression somber. I understand. I'm ready to be honest about everything. As they sat down, Agent Collins began to outline the evidence they had gathered. Sophie listened intently, her heart pounding as the details of David's financial dealings were laid bare. She could see the shame in his eyes, but she also felt a sense of relief. This was the moment of truth, and they were finally confronting the reality of their situation. David, we need to know why you made these transactions, Agent Collins said, his tone firm but fair. It's important for us to understand your motivations. David took a deep breath, his voice steady. I thought I was helping my sister. I didn't want to burden Sophie with my family's problems, so I tried to handle it on my own. I see now that I was wrong. Sophie felt a mix of anger and compassion as she listened to him. You didn't just handle it on your own, David. You put our future at risk. You need to take responsibility for your actions. No, he replied, his voice filled with regret. I'm ready to face the consequences. I just want to make things right. As the meeting continued, Sophie felt a sense of empowerment. She was no longer the passive participant in her life. She was taking control of her future. She had made the difficult decision to stand by David, but she was also holding him accountable for his actions. After the meeting, Agent Collins thanked them for their honesty. We appreciate your cooperation and will be in touch regarding the next steps. It's important for you both to continue working on your relationship during this process. As they left the office, Sophie felt a weight lift off her shoulders. They had faced the truth together, and while the road ahead would still be challenging, she felt a renewed sense of hope. Thank you for being there for me, David said, his voice filled with sincerity. I know I've put you through so much, and I'm grateful for your support. Sophie smiled, feeling a warmth in her heart. We're in this together, David, but remember, it's going to take time to rebuild trust. I need to see real change. I promise I'll do everything I can to prove to you that I'm committed to this, he replied, his eyes earnest. As they walked hand in hand, Sophie felt a sense of determination. They had faced the storm, and while the future was uncertain, she was ready to embrace whatever came next. In the following weeks, David continued to attend therapy, and he made a genuine effort to change his behavior. He began to set boundaries with Megan, encouraging her to seek help for her own issues rather than relying on him for financial support. Sophie watched as he grew stronger, and she felt a sense of pride in his progress. Sophie also focused on her own growth, diving deeper into her design work and even starting a small online business. She found joy in her creativity and began to build a life that was independent of David's past mistakes. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, David turned to her with a serious expression. "Sophie, I know I've made mistakes, but I want you to know how much I appreciate your support. You've helped me see things differently." Sophie smiled, feeling a warmth in her heart. "I believe in you, David. But we both need to keep working on ourselves. This is just the beginning." As they embraced, Sophie felt a sense of hope for the future. They had faced their challenges head-on, and while the road ahead would still have its ups and downs, she was ready to walk it with David by her side. Together, they were building a new foundation for their relationship, one built on honesty, trust, and mutual respect. And as they looked toward the future, Sophie knew that they could overcome anything as long as they faced it together.